tonight? Well, heading into Election Day, there were several business groups who banded together to endorse candidates, some of those groups doing it for the very first time. And in the end, they claimed success in many races, primarily for helping flip control of the state Senate, we think, to the Republicans. Now these groups are looking forward as they're aligning themselves with Andrew Cuomo as he fights with public employee unions. Joining me tonight is Heather Ricchetti, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Business Council of New York State. Next to her is Brian Sampson, the Executive Director of Unshackle Upstate. And across the table, all by his lonesome, is Mike Elmendorf, the Director of the New York chapter of the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
So who wants to start crowing? Who wants to start with the victory lap? Do you want to start, Brian?
Well, you know, I don't know if we want to go with a full victory lap, but
half a lap.
Yeah, I mean, what we saw in this election cycle is the taxpayers speaking out very clearly that they wanted to find a way to get state spending under control, start to lower the taxes and fees. We provided them a vehicle and a mechanism through a scorecard and endorsement process of people that they should support. So they did. Upstate is much better positioned in the New York State Senate now simply because there's more upstate senators.
Well, we should say also there's one hanging Chad race,
there is
right?
one.
Sort of, so to speak.
But even in the event of a tie,
sure,
Upstate has more representation now than we did heading into the elections, and that's a critical thing for us.
But don't you think it's also going to be difficult? I mean, there's a lot of sticky wickets for Senate Republicans to deal with.
Whoever won was not going to have a very large majority, and at 32 to 30, they're going to have to work very hard to make sure that they have all the members' needs taken care of, that they're hearing the voices of the taxpayers, and issues are going to come up where they're not going to have a resounding issue, and you're going to have to reach across the aisle. And I think that's the encouraging thing, that regardless of the issue, you're going to have to find a way to work with both sides of the aisle. They're going to find a way to work with each other because everybody wants lower spending, lower taxes, lower fees.
Heather, what of this whole sort of list of endorsements that you guys did are the ones that are the big wins that you think worked?
I think for us, we were most pleased by the Lee Zeldin pickup on Long Island and Patty Ritchie up in the North Country. Those two were critical races, and I think as a business organization, we all of us work together to try and make those victories happen. And you know, really the first time that the business community banded together to try and support pro-business, pro-tax cut, pro-fiscal reform candidates.
Can you say at this point the ballpark of how much was spent at the moment?
I don't know what other organizations spent. I think a collective impact wouldn't be all what ran through our PAC, because we did do some fundraising externally. It's in the neighborhood of $250,000, which is very modest.
Yeah, not that much at all, actually.
We don't have the resources that the public sector unions have to spend on campaigns, and hopefully some point in the future we'll be able to be much more competitive in terms of getting our message out.
So, Mike, there were a couple of races that were surprises that
Sure.
you might perhaps wish that you got involved in now?
Well, hindsight's 20/20, right? But I think Brian was being a little bit modest. I mean, I think we can.
And it falls to you to clear that up.
Exactly. Say what you will. I think we can declare victory. I mean, we came together in an unprecedented way. We talked about that with you before on the show, and it worked. I think we were absolutely pivotal in electing Lee Zeldin on Long Island over Brian Foley, who voted against my organization's position, NFIB's position, 100% of the time over the last 2 years, which is pretty astounding. We really played an instrumental role in Patty Ritchie's election in the North Country over Senator Albertine. And there's a good reason for why we were so engaged. These last 2 years, the economy has been terrible for the folks that we represent and worry about on a daily basis. But perhaps worse than that has been the sort of decisions that were being made in Albany, and particularly in the state Senate, where there was a new majority that was there for only 2 years.
Here's the thing, though, and I have had every senator, so you guys have seen some of it probably, I have had every single one of these new senators, with the exception of maybe a couple, come in, and we've seen particularly from the western part of the state, which would be Grisanti and who am I thinking of? Kennedy,
Gallivan.
no,
Right.
and Gallivan. I mean, we're thinking of people who are saying, I'm willing to hold things up. I'm willing to put my constituents first. I'm willing to act independent. Okay, that is a problem, because that's the problem that John Sampson had. He couldn't herd the cats. So what makes you think that this is going to be any better?
Well, that's not necessarily a problem. The problem is that more of John Sampson's conference didn't do that over the course of the last 2 years. Darrell Albertine, Dave Valesky, these guys should have said no to a lot of the things that passed in that Senate majority. They did on a few occasions, and when they did, I think it's safe to say that we all gave them credit for doing that. But they didn't stand up and say no. Stopping things from happening is not necessarily a bad thing if what was going to happen was bad. And these last 2 years, that majority launched what really was an unrelenting assault on what was left of the private sector economy. It had to stop, and it did.
I couldn't agree with Mike more. I mean, I think actually, to some extent, the gridlock that the Senate Democratic Conference experienced the first year was a benefit to the business community. We weren't saddled with the very nice-sounding paid family leave, but the only reason that didn't pass is because they were unable to get the votes to the floor. I think that what you'll see is with a majority that is much more empowering of upstate, that if there is gridlock on issues, it will be because people are trying to protect upstate's interests versus what the gridlock that was experienced before was really about who was in control, who was in charge.
Go ahead.
And to piggyback on what Heather's saying, a lot of the dissension that you saw was over the fact that spending was going up so high in the taxes and fees. I think what you're going to see, or what we're hoping to see out of the Senate Republicans and even Governor-elect Cuomo, is that spending is going to go the opposite way. It's going to actually go lower, and you're going to see a reduction in taxes and fees, or at least a hold on taxes and fees. And if you have that, I don't think you're going to see nearly as much dissension as we saw over the last 2 years.
Okay, considering, however, the modest amount, relatively speaking, I mean, obviously for the real world it's a lot of money, but in comparison to what Bloomberg, as it turns out, dumped into the Senate Republicans, close to $1 million, I mean, how do you compete with that? Because, again, you see Mike Bloomberg using his cash and his own personal checkbook to protect New York City's interest when he actually, arguably, doesn't have that much of a leg to stand on in the Senate, within the Senate GOP. He's got, he's got Lanza, he's got Golden, right, and Padovan is gone.
Yeah.
But what I think you also have, though, are some grassroots infrastructures that we can tap into. A group of people in upstate New York that are, to say they're frustrated with their state government, I think would be the understatement of potentially, the 2000s thus far. If we can get those people more engaged in calling their senators and their assembly members directly and saying, hey, I agree with this or I don't agree with this, I don't know that it matters how much financial influence you may have had. It does come back to constituents, and it does come back to the political pressure that we tried to instill in these past elections.
Let's talk. Go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think it's going to be really, really challenging for the Senate Republicans if they do, in fact, come into power. And I think it's
almost a foregone conclusion. Almost.
Because I think the very difficult area where we're going to have some challenges is in school aid. If there
Sure.
are significant school aid cuts, you have this problem of people wanting to protect their districts, rightfully so. On the other hand, as business entities and organizations and taxpayers, we want to keep the local real property taxes down. So I think that's going to be one of the most difficult areas in this coming year.
Let's talk statewide before you get there. Now, did you guys do a statewide endorsement?
We did not.
So you were the only ones, right?
We
for the
did.
state? Okay. You didn't. You did Cuomo.
We did, and that was the only statewide
And that was the
race we
only one.
endorsed in.
And we endorsed Harry Wilson.
Okay, and you didn't get there.
Correct.
Close, actually.
Close, very close.
So how is that going to play out, do you think? I mean, and now this is turning to what I was talking about at the top of the show. There's this new committee. It's called the Committee to Save New York. It's business interests banding together with some private sector unions to take advantage of the split between public and private sector. To the degree that you can talk about this, because I know it's still a developing situation, what is the point here?
Well, we're very supportive of the effort. In past years, you've seen the healthcare and teachers unions spending millions of dollars on advertising in opposition to spending cuts. And we feel very strongly that it's necessary to push back on this, because if one side is shouting everyone else down and no one hears the other side of the story, it's very difficult for the legislators to have the backbone to take the hard votes. And so we are very supportive of the effort. We are participating in the effort, and are very hopeful that we'll have some degree of success in this upcoming budget cycle.
And I think it's some of a natural step from what we did this past election cycle.
I mean,
the business community unilaterally almost never came together to influence elections as we did this past fall. I think this could be a natural progression of that, something we certainly are encouraged to see. But what you're going to have to do is, as Heather said, beat back that public opinion piece of it, that, don't cut my hospital, don't cut my education. The reality is you can't afford what we have. Our taxes are too high. Something has to give. And so what I think we're optimistically looking for is you know, at the end of the day, instead of seeing how, you know, in the past the governor and legislature come to agreement with the unions, we actually see headlines in the papers that say governor and legislature reach compromise with the taxpayers. How great would that be?
Okay, but just to play devil's advocate, and you, Mike, you guys have also been approached to potentially play a part in
and
this.
I expect we will. I mean, we're very encouraged by what Governor-elect Cuomo is talking about doing. His fiscal agenda, his fiscal platform is almost completely in line with where small business and NFIB members are. And it's clearly necessary to do something like this Committee Save New York if he's going to be successful, because we've seen this movie before.
Yes.
You can change the name of the governor. It's almost the same ad that gets run budget cycle after budget cycle. And if there's no response to it, if there's no answer, it's very hard for that governor, whoever it might be, or the legislature to do what we, I think, agree needs to be done in the state.
Okay, but to play devil's advocate, Andrew Cuomo ran on a platform of taking the quote-unquote special interest out of Albany, right? The power away from the special interest. Aren't you guys arguably just a different special interest? I mean, business community has an
I'm not sure
interest.
we're quite as special as the others.
Less special?
I mean, well,
semi-special?
Well, hey, listen, we represent, and all of our organizations represent a wide variety of different types. So the thing that they have in common is they are employers. And so to the extent that our special interest is a recovering economy and job growth and restoring upstate's economy in particular, I mean, okay, that's a special interest, but we represent industries from, and Mike, I had small business, you name it. He's got members
Everything you can think of.
who are, you know, barbers, veterinarians. I think obviously we have a different membership, but again, wide variety of membership. So.
And you asked the question, Liz, about how much money we all spent in this election cycle, and sort of marveled at how little it was, and compared to what others spent, who I think are the real special interests that the governor-elect is talking about. The public employees unions,
and
the
they
teachers
gave to
union,
him, just
the
for the
healthcare
record,
lobby.
they
Well,
gave
that's fine.
Andrew Cuomo
I
campaign
think it's
cash.
good indication that giving somebody money doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do
we shall see,
what you
though.
want them to
We
do.
shall see.
They have spent millions and millions of dollars in political campaigns. They've spent millions and millions of dollars on these ad campaigns against responsible budgets. And here's the trick. They're very much at the point where they are a victim of their own success, because we are really near to the stage where there are not enough people left in this state to pay for the rest of them. That's where we're at. This is a defining moment for the state, and I think Andrew Cuomo is exactly right about it, which is why we all came together. It's the same thing that motivated us together in this political campaign. It's not just about winning elections. We did that great victory lap. Now it's about governing, and it's about making the kind of tough choices that have to be made to save this state's economy. It's no less than that. It's that serious.
You get the last word, Brian.
Well, we are a special interest group from the standpoint of we do want certain things done, but we're not a special interest group that's asking for an increase in pay. We're not a special interest group that's asking for increased benefits, increased time off. And our issue isn't necessarily with the public sector workers. It's with the public sector union leadership that just doesn't seem to fundamentally understand we can't afford what you're asking for. We can't even afford what you're currently getting. So you have to come to the table and find some way to give back. And I think that's what we saw in the elections. I think that's what you may see coming out of this new committee that's being formed. But it has to start somewhere, and it's going to have to start in 2011.
Well, it's going to be an interesting year, and I want to thank you. I'm sure you guys will be back. I want to thank you very much, all of you, for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.